People often comment that it takes too long or it's too hard to develop relationship models, so they avoid doing it. I'd like to unfold this crop damage relationship model as a way of presenting what I think is a very straightforward way to go about developing relationship models that's not complicated at all. Now, to begin with, this particular model, the situation that I'm trying to understand how to deal with is crop damage. That's the situation. So starting with the situation, I simply asked, what influences this, or what does this influence? And by asking that question, I understand that the reason that I'm having crop damage is because I have crop-eating pests and they're damaging the crops. And then I ask, okay, and what else influences crop-eating pests? And I come up with pest mortality. And continuing, I ask, well, what influences pest mortality? Well, pesticide application is one thing that does that. And then I ask about, well, what influences pesticide application? And it's the existence of the crop damage. So I've actually completed this loop by simply asking this one question over and over again, and what does this influence, or what influences this? And I'm consistently looking to close loops, because we've learned that loops, which provide feedback, tend to have more influence over the behavior of relationship structures than direct influences. Though in this particular situation, I noticed that applying pesticides to kill crop-eating pests only seems to help for the current year, because next year I have to apply pesticides again. So I ask, well, what else might be happening here? What's influencing the crop-eating pests in this particular situation? And I understand that crop-eating pests, the number of them increases because of birth of pests. And that happens because crop-eating pests have births. So I end up with a reinforcing population growth structure here that is contributing to the structure migrating in a direction that I really don't want it to go in. Additionally, I've noticed that year after year, I have to apply more pesticides or stronger pesticides to deal with the same crop-eating pests, and continuing to investigate this and asking myself, well, what does pesticide application influence in addition to simply pest mortality? And come to find out, pesticide application, the pests have this nasty habit of developing an immunity to the pesticides that I employ, which then further decreases pest mortality, which increases the number of crop-eating insects, which relates to more crop damage, and I have another vicious reinforcing structure moving me in a direction that I don't want to go in. And I do this simply by looking at the situation and asking, for each individual element, what does this influence, or what influences this? Now, note that this diagram unfolds in what appears to be a very orderly manner. Don't get the impression that they actually develop that way. They typically develop looking like a mess, and after you review them and put things in and take them out and put them back in, you begin to develop a sense of order to the way that the story unfolds. And once you sort of get it distilled down to a meaningful set of relationships, the story emerges and it all looks like it hangs together and makes sense. In this particular situation, I continue to ask, for this particular situation, well, what else influences pest mortality? And I find out that pesticide application has a tendency to kill some controlling insects that used to eat the pests that are damaging my crops. So that influences pest mortality and crop-eating insects, and I end up with another vicious reinforcing structure called predator destruction. Now, don't worry too much about if you're not familiar with the notation, because in the relationship structure, or the relationships section of this work, I will surface the notation and the meaning of it in excruciating detail, and hopefully it will become clear. The intent here is to simply give you a sense of the idea that one can develop a relationship structure simply by looking at the elements and asking the question, what does this influence and what influences this? And continuing to look for loops that close, and the notation will sort itself out in the future. So hopefully this gives you a sense of, also this is not meant to be an exhaustive model of all of the relevant relationships that one would continue to evolve were this a real situation that I was trying to figure out how myself or someone else was trying to figure out how to deal with, because there are numerous additional relationships that are probably relevant in any given particular context. Now, note that this is actually a portion, an element of this structure that I'm working on, this work called And It's All Connected, about how to understand relationships and their implications and solve problems so they stay solved and not create new problems in the process. And there's a link to this work in the notes section of the video. So hopefully you have found this informative and useful, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.